Hey, thank you for my introduction and thank you to the organisers and for having me today. So I'm Natalie and I recently started a postdoc with Margot Taylor at the Hospital for Sick Children, and I'm going to be talking about kind of our experiences as the users, the end users of OPMs, kind of what we've shown so far in the few years that we've had an OPM MEG system, and then also kind of what we see for the future and what we want from sensor designers. So why study development? I mean, how can we understand brain function without understanding where it came from? And that's kind of the critical question here. And crucially, how can we understand developmental disorders, which begin typically in early life, if we can't understand what's going on in the brain in those first few years of life? But it is a challenge, and that's kind of part of the reason as to why we would want to study it, and also part of the reason why OPM MEG might help us. Because a lot of what we currently understand comes from animal models using mice and things like that, or from EEG and fMRI. And these modalities have limitations. It's difficult to translate what we learn about animals directly to humans. And so a rat and a mouse's brain is quite substantially different to our own. And also EEG suffers from poor spatial resolution, and fMRI is very challenging, especially around the age of around 2 years old. I don't know if you've ever tried to put a 2-year-old in an MRI, but that could be quite difficult. And so MEG kind of offers a positive alternative to this. So MEG benefits from higher spatial resolution while sharing a very high temporal resolution as EEG. But conventional MEG systems, which comprise of cooled squid sensors, are housed in these rigid helmets. And you can see here a 5-year-old in a conventional adult-sized MEG. And you can see that there's quite a clear kind of gap around the head. And because the magnetic field drops off with the square of distance, that means we actually get a much lower sensor, a lower signal to noise from young children than we do from adults. And when studying development, that's kind of critical because we can't separate the confounds of head size versus what we're actually measuring. So people have tried to address that with squid sensors by developing MEG systems that conform to smaller heads. So in kind of the 2000s to 2010s, there have been systems developed around the world. There's including a system here in Sydney, which are use the same technology but are designed around a smaller head size. But you can see there's not very many of these around the world because for each different head size, you would have to have an entirely new system, an entire new dewar of liquid helium. So these are very expensive, and crucially for studying developmental trajectories, you can only study one head size. You'd need different systems for entirely across the developmental age. So OPMs offer an exciting alternative to this. So back in 2016, sensors started to become sensitive enough to envisage this idea of on-scalp MEG using OPMs. And then this developed into the systems that we are seeing today. And obviously I have a photo of myself here. And there's not only Circa, which is the system you can see I'm wearing, but obviously other companies, Fieldline, Mag4Health, among them. So they have been designing these wearable or on-scalp MEG systems based off OPMs that kind of address this issue and allow us to put sensors close to the scalp surface. So SickKids purchased the first circumagnetic system back in 2021, and they have housed it in a repurposed vacuum schmelz shielded room that you can see here, which is nicely decorated to make it more child-friendly. And we put our OPM sensors in one of 5 different helmet sizes. So we have 40 dual axis Q-spin sensors, and we have helmets ranging from 1 year old, which you can just see the edge of in the green helmet, all the way up to kind of an adult large, which is the purple helmet that I think everybody has seen many photos of now. And we use a biplanar nulling coil system with a reference array to keep the magnetic field surrounding the head nice and low to allow some movement. And so here's some example photos of some children in the 4-year-old helmet, in the 2-year-old helmet, and a couple in our 1-year-old helmet. We always have to put some cute photos up here because that's kind of part of the job. And we've had a pretty great compliance in the fact that we're now scanning in the, I think about the 120s of typically developing children in our main study. So in our main study, we're investigating early signatures of autism spectrum disorder. And we're doing this to try and better understand how the brain function and behavioral differences emerge, but also to maybe identify early signatures, because with autism, early intervention has been shown to really dramatically improve outcomes in life quality. And so we've been recruiting typically developing children aged from 1 to 5 years old. And critically, with an adult MEG, this is an age range that we would never have tried to scan with an adult MEG because we wouldn't have been able to get a good sensitivity across the whole cortex. We're also bringing in children aged from 2 to 4 years old with a diagnosis of autism, and we work with a local hospital in Toronto that helps us recruit these children. And then we also scan the baby siblings of these children with an autism diagnosis from 1 year old up until we follow them up each year. And then we look and see whether they get diagnosed with autism or not, because autism has quite a high genetic factor. And so siblings of children with autism have around a 1 in 5 chance of going on and getting a diagnosis of autism themselves. So what we run is 2 passive visual tasks. So we have emotional faces presented and moving concentric circles interspersed in one task with some cartoon characters to keep the children attended. And so the reason we use these is because with autism and other neurodevelopmental disorders, we know that kind of emotional face processing and social perception of emotions can be altered. And the moving concentric circles are known to elicit visual gamma oscillations, which have also been associated with excitation inhibition balance in the visual cortex. And excitation inhibition balance is crucial in studying neurodevelopment, because a key theory in some of the pathophysiology of autism is this imbalance between excitatory signals and inhibitory signals in the brain. And then we also do movie-based resting state. So in a lot of conventional MEG studies, they might choose to do resting state with a fixation cross or ask participants to stare at the cross or keep their eyes shut. But a 2-year-old won't follow that instruction. And so we have in fMRI, for younger children, they developed this Inscapes video, which is kind of slow moving shapes. But in ours, we also tried to adapt to even younger children. We have this Baby Einstein's video, which is an amalgamation of clips from the Baby Einstein's show with some nice music. And that helps the kids comply, sit relatively still, at least keep the helmet on and not try and throw it off their heads. And so I'm just going to show a couple of early results. So what we've shown is that we can measure this face response. So this is a subset of our participants. You can see we've only got a few adults and 25 children in this. And what we're showing is that we can measure this M170 component, which localizes to the fusiform gyrus. And this is a well-established response to emotional face processing. And we've shown that we can measure that with OPMs. And more of these results are in a poster in Biomag that I'll be helping present for one of my colleagues, Christina, who couldn't be here. And then we also have shown that we can measure this visual gamma response. So this is from a seed in the visual cortex, where we see during these circles, we see this increase in power across the gamma band and kind of the high beta band. And we're investigating how these signals evolve. And then with our resting state, my colleague Marley has applied something called FOOF, which is looking at the 1/F profile. And so she's taken the power spectrum density, which you can see in A on the far side, and then taken the aperiodic component and looked at how that evolves with age and the periodic component. And we have firstly replicated kind of a well-established finding that the alpha peak, which is a brain response typically seen with higher power at the back of the head, is usually around 10 hertz, but in young children, it actually seems to be lower frequency. And you can see in the toddlers and young children here, it seems to be shifted towards the lower frequencies. And she's also shown that the aperiodic component has developmental effects. This has also been related to excitatory inhibitory balance as well. So it will be interesting to investigate with our cohorts with an autism diagnosis. So those results have very recently been published in Developmental Cognitive Neuroscience and will be shown in the Biomag Symposium and Optimal Use of OPMs. So on to the challenges, the kind of the stuff we wanted to prepare for you guys. It takes a village to do an OPM scan with a pediatric cohort. We have 2 research assistants in the room and a parent in the room for every scan. So you can see here we've got the child wearing the helmet. We have 1 research assistant behind whose role is to basically catch the helmet if they try and throw it off. And then we have a research assistant in front who helps with keeping the child compliant with this, using the stimulation. We use button boxes to try and ensure that they keep attended to any visual stimulation. And then we have the parent there, and the parent is also wearing a helmet to try and keep the child feeling comfortable, thinking, hey, they're all wearing helmets. We also have to limit our protocols to about 5 minutes because for under 5-year-olds, their attention spans are pretty short. So any method of getting higher signal to noise, for example, like Niles SSS, is a really great advantage because we have to work with much less data with these young children. We also use a tether. So because we're using a repurposed vacuum schmelz room, there were actually rigs on the ceiling that we could then apply, attach a tether to take some of the weight of the helmet off. Because while this helmet full of sensors is actually relatively light for an adult, for a 1 or 2-year-old, it's actually quite heavy and they'd feel it on their neck. It's something in the order of around, I think, 600 to 700 grams, which doesn't sound like much for us, but for a young child, that can be a real problem. Also helps us with keeping the helmet safe in case they try and throw it off, and keeping it within the center of kind of the low magnetic field environment. So for the future, we see areas of progress in kind of an obvious one is the sensor footprint and weight management. Obviously, smaller sensors means we can get more channels of data and we can get more from our data. And when it's so difficult to scan the children, the more we can get from our 5 minutes, the better. Also operating temperature, so we use rubidium based sensors by QSpin, and they operate at slightly above body temperature. So we have a lot of insulation. So you can see we have these felt caps that circa our cell, but we also have had the mum of one of the postdocs in our lab design and sew these adorable little inners with dinosaurs on, and they strap under the head. And so the way we keep the helmet in the same place on the head when we've got the tether is those are attached to the helmet with Velcro, so they can take some force. So if the child pulls too hard, they're not going to get hurt. It'll come out of the helmet. But most of the time, if they're only moving slightly, it shouldn't come out of the helmet and hopefully won't move relative to their head. Obviously, system integration and reliability is a big one, which I know everybody working on sensors seems to be working on. We have the Gen 3 dual axis QSpin sensors, so they have their own electronics individually, and we have a big rack. And obviously, we have when we troubleshoot sensors, we do that on an individual basis. And when you have 40 of them, that can be quite a big task. And so with the developments into things like the Neuro One, and I know Fieldline also have kind of integrated multiple sensors within a single box. I'm sure the other companies do too. That will be really helpful for getting these systems to the users. Cable management is a key one for us. So when designing kind of the helmets, a way of keeping the cables away from the children's prying hands, we usually ask the parent to have the role of keeping the hands down, but kids are very interested and they want to grab them. And sometimes if they're upset about having a helmet on, they will try and actually pull them. So actually managing the cables in a way that keeps them safe is really important. And then environmental noise control is a really big one. So we are in the center of downtown Toronto. We have subway line at the end of the block. We have cars all around us. We have a massive hospital right above us. And so we have a really high noise environment. But this is what the environment would be if you want these systems to go out into hospitals. And so we're testing it in a place that is needed to be tested because it can't always be in a field in the middle of nowhere. for OPM scans. And especially when you bring children in, being in a hospital means we have access to all those participant cohorts. And if we see the clinical use case, most hospitals are in the center of cities. And so it's really important to try and keep this environmental noise down. And so we have that with our biplanar coil system, but there's a lot of advances in that. And we see that being a huge important area for the future of OPMs in pediatric research. So just to summarize, OPMs offer an exciting new platform to study neurodevelopment. And the ability to scan young children is arguably one of the main advantages of OPM MEG. I might be biased on that because that's my entire career, but we've demonstrated the first OPM MEG system in a pediatric setting, and we're getting really exciting results. And so there's quite a few areas we can still see for improvements to allow even better data collection. But the future of OPM research, OPMs in developmental research, is bright. That's cut off from the bottom of the screen, but that's a bit of a cliffhanger. It does say bright at the bottom, I promise. I'd just like to acknowledge all of my colleagues at the Taylor Lab. As I said, it does take a village, so we have a lot of research assistants, postdocs, and they're all wonderful people who work with all these crazy kids. And then our colleagues at Circa Magnetics, who are always willing to take a call and help us with the system. And then QSpin, of course, for developing the sensors that are making all this possible. And then our funding bodies as well. Thank you so much.